In this video, we'll be looking at the atomic bomb, from its creation and development to the impact it had after it was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The questions that you should be able to answer by the end of this video are: how and why was the atomic bomb developed, and what was the impact of the atomic bomb? The key terms that you should be able to define by the end of the video are the Manhattan Project, Robert Oppenheimer, Fat Man and Little Boy, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and nuclear fallout and radiation. The Office of Scientific Research and Development was a government organization created in the United States during World War II to help develop war technologies, things like radar and more accurate bombs. Part of the Office of Scientific Research and Development was the Manhattan Project, which was established in 1942. The Manhattan Project was the code name for the secret government research and engineering project that developed the world's first nuclear weapons. President Franklin Roosevelt created a committee to look into the possibility of developing a nuclear weapon after he received a letter from Albert Einstein in October of 1939. In his letter, Einstein warned the president that Nazi Germany was likely already at work on developing a nuclear weapon. And by August of 1942, the Manhattan Project was underway. Within the Manhattan Project, work was conducted at various locations with scientists from various countries involved in the project. Los Alamos, New Mexico was the epicenter for the Manhattan Project. There, a group of scientists were charged with building the bomb itself, and they were headed by Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer. Just 3 years after the launch of the Manhattan Project, on July 16, 1945, the first nuclear bomb was detonated in the early morning at a military test facility in Alamogordo, New Mexico. The intense brightness of the explosion's flash was followed by the rise of a large mushroom cloud from the desert floor. House windows more than 50 miles away shattered. Upon seeing the first successful test of an atomic bomb, Oppenheimer remarked that it brought to mind words from the Bhagavad Gita: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Within the next 3 weeks, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, ending the war in the Pacific. Now I'd like to go over really quickly how an atom bomb works. Inside of a bomb, an atom is split in half, and when the atom is split, massive amounts of energy is released in a process that's known as nuclear fission. The immense destructive power of an atom bomb derives from a sudden release of energy from that split atom. There were 2 different types of atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. The first one, Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima, and the second one, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. The way that Little Boy works is that when it was dropped, it fired a uranium projectile at a uranium target in order to create an explosion. Fat Man, on the other hand, was an implosion device with a plutonium core. So here's just a little bit of background about what is going on with World War II and the end of the war. In May of 1945, the Allies defeated Germany. This was 2 months before the atomic bomb was completed. Now, despite the fact that Germany had already surrendered, war with Japan continued. Military advisors to President Harry S. Truman warned that continuing a ground war with Japan would result in the deaths of tens or hundreds of thousands of U.S. forces, as well as the deaths of many Japanese military personnel and civilians. In mid-July of 1945, President Truman was notified of the successful test of the atomic bomb, what he called the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. Thousands of hours of research and development, as well as billions of dollars, had contributed to its production. And as president, it was Truman's decision if the weapon would be used with the goal to end the war. Truman had 4 options. The first was just to continue conventional bombing of Japanese cities. Between April 1944 and August 1945, an estimated 300,000 Japanese people were killed by American bombs, and 400,000 more were wounded in American air raids. So by August of 1945, it was clear that conventional bombing wasn't an effective way to end the war. Truman's next option was a ground invasion of Japan. So basically, the United States could launch a traditional ground invasion of the Japanese islands. However, experience showed that the Japanese didn't easily surrender. In fact, they were likely to fight even more fiercely if the United States invaded their homeland. So by August 1945, Truman decided that a ground invasion would result in excessive American casualties, as well as excessive casualties for Japanese civilians. This left Truman with two other options: to demonstrate the atomic bomb on an unpopulated island, or to use the atomic bomb on a populated area in a Japanese city. In May of 1945, Truman formed an interim committee, which was a committee to advise the president about matters pertaining to the use of nuclear weapons. After intense debate, the committee concluded that a technical demonstration on an unpopulated island would not likely bring an end to the war, and they could only see direct military use as an effective way to end the war. Throughout much of World War II, Allied bombers would often drop leaflets on a city warning civilians of impending bombings of that city. After Truman decided to drop the two bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, leaflets were dropped on several Japanese cities to warn civilians. However, these leaflets did not directly reference the atomic bomb, and it's unclear whether they were used to warn citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki specifically. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. In the United States, President Truman released a press statement which read in part, 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. In Hiroshima, the temperature near the blast site reached 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky seemed to explode, and birds ignited in midair. The asphalt boiled. People over 2 miles away from the blast site were burned alive. Those who survived the initial blast often had raw skin hanging in flaps around their hips and would jump into waterways to escape the heat. Approximately 80,000 people were killed as a direct result of the blast, and another 35,000 were injured. 1 week after Hiroshima, on August 14, 1945, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. 6 days later, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. And then finally, the Japanese government signed an unconditional surrender, which officially ended World War II. The total death toll from Hiroshima was roughly 146,000 people, and the total death toll from Nagasaki was roughly 80,000 people. In the immediate aftermath of the dropping of both atomic bombs, the cities were completely destroyed. And while most victims died from severe burns, others were crushed by those collapsing buildings. Many survivors of the initial blast have seen increased cancer rates due to the long-term exposure of radiation from the bomb, or nuclear fallout. Now I'd like to take some time to look at a few images that encapsulate the destructiveness of these new nuclear weapons. In this image, you can see the complete collapse of Hiroshima. This is the ruins of the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall. Luckily, the structure was preserved and was later renamed the Ginbaku Domu, or the Hiroshima Peace Memorial. This is an aerial image of Hiroshima before and after the bombing. So here's another shot of the ruins of Hiroshima. If you look kind of in the lower left-hand corner of this image, you can see a man surveying the rubble. In this image, you can see the shape of a victim burned into the steps of a bank. The heat and light generated by the atomic bomb was so intense that it changed the shades of roads and buildings. So often in places in Hiroshima, you can see the ghosts or shadows left behind by victims of the blast. This image depicts a survivor whose skin had been burned in a pattern corresponding with that of the kimono she had been wearing at the time of the blast. Because these atomic bombs destroyed the entire city, many Japanese citizens were left homeless. In this picture, you can see some victims of the catastrophe taking refuge in the rubble of a bank that was transformed to house the wounded and homeless. The key takeaway that you should be getting from this video is that the use of atomic bombs hastened the end of the war and sparked debates about the morality of using atomic weapons.